We're on the cusp of one of the biggest events in the history of human wealth, the Great Wealth Transfer. $84 trillion are expected to be inherited from baby boomers, most of which is passing on to younger generations. At the same time, however, 80% of inheritance churns away from a credit union. It's a lose-lose situation for institutions and individuals alike. Banks and credit unions are losing eye-watering amounts of money in lost accounts, and inheritors feel unseen and undervalued in one of the most difficult chapters of their lives. One startup is rewriting the story around inheritance, changing the situation into a win-win by embedding empathy into the experience. Hi, I'm Zena, a contributor at Startup Beat and your host for the brand new podcast, Founders on the Beat. I am delighted to welcome to this inaugural episode Saeid Kian, co-founder and CEO of Ribbon, a San Francisco-based startup empowering institutions and individuals alike to handle this incredibly exciting yet daunting era in finance. Saeid, I'm going to go right into the heart of it. Ribbon's trajectory stems from your personal tragedy. You've often mentioned how your own experience with a broken inheritance system really set the scene for Ribbon's birth. Would you like to go into that experience a little bit?
Yeah, and thanks so much for having me. It's so exciting to be here on the inaugural episode. I'm happy to share about my background. I think it obviously directly connects to what we're doing at Ribbon. The story is I'm the first in my family born in the US, in Virginia. I grew up and went to college there. And after graduating, I moved abroad. I went to Southeast Asia and started doing, a variety of different experiences for my work. So initially I started off with consulting work and working with large development organizations like the World Bank, the ILO, the IFC. I then moved to Myanmar, where I helped launch a mobile money company, did that for a number of years, then moved to Singapore, started working for Facebook way back when it was just called Facebook, doing things like, payment systems, mobile money, et cetera. Eventually moved over, still living in Singapore and in Southeast Asia, working for Stripe, doing similar work in terms of payment systems. So I was really building out this base of knowledge around fintech and financial technology. And to make a long story short, 2020 rolls around, COVID hits, my wife and I are in Singapore. I get a call from my dad, and he tells me he has stage 4 pancreatic cancer. And for anyone who's listening, if you know about cancer or pancreatic cancer, you likely know that it's a really, really harsh one. Generally, you find it when it's quite late. It's really hard to have symptoms beforehand. If you find it, before stage 4, you're generally considered lucky. We unfortunately were not lucky in that sense at all. So afterwards, we were thinking about what we can do. How can we, go help? Just be there for my dad. So we moved back to Virginia. The story I always share is like we were trying everything. We were taking radiation, we were taking chemo. Nothing's working at that point. He's not a candidate for a Whipple surgery, which is like one of the main surgeries that you would do to extend someone's life during a pancreatic cancer diagnosis. And ultimately, we just decided the only route that was there and the only route that made sense was hospice. So we put him into hospice. Start crossing T's, dotting I's, doing my last father-son trips with him. And eventually he passes away. And as you can imagine, it's like an incredibly tough time for me and the family. And within, 24 to 48 hours, I'm just immediately hit with what now we refer to as the logistical nightmare that comes with inheritance. And the story that I always share with everyone that, we can get to pay attention to us is, at the time, my dad had 5 financial institutions. Turns out that tends to be quite average, especially after COVID. You see a lot of people signing up for different financial institutions. Every single one of those inheritance processes is what I would describe as broken and unempathetic. They all involve some version of a call center, a branch, et cetera. The story I would share, in addition to that, is it was my first interaction ever with a credit union. And this turns out to not be a unique experience, depending on the data, depending on who you ask. Tends to be the most common way millennials interact with credit unions is through the inheritance process. And I go through this inheritance process and it's just a nightmare. I mean, it took 4, almost 5 weeks to get a, basic account where I'm already set up as a beneficiary. I already have all my documents ready. I had time to prepare, right? If there's a silver lining that comes with hospice is that you're thinking about this stuff and that you have time to prepare. And at the end of this process, the lady who's working there, who's very, very kind and very, very sweet, she, even though her intentions were good, ultimately she's just following a process, which just ended up writing me a check of all the money and handing me the check. And I'm walking out the door, and the only thing I can think is like, you just spent 5 weeks on me between call center, branch, and deposit operations. Who knows how many hours. You don't have the money. I'm holding the check. So like, you didn't keep any of the business, and I had a terrible time. So it's not like this was a good experience for me. Like, till this day, I'm still not with that credit union. And that was the seed and what ended up evolving into our company called Ribbon, which wants to specifically focus on the high level trends that you highlighted at the beginning with the great wealth transfer, and then trying to build out a platform that can make it more empathetic. And so that people like me, people like the millions of Americans every year who have to go through the inheritance process can have something that's a little bit more empathetic.
Just hearing your own experience, it does give me chills actually, because it's something like mortality is a part of human life, but dealing with all these paperwork during such a horrific time shouldn't be a thing.
Mm,
I think it's also really important to acknowledge how loss and grief, while incredibly lonely, they are a universal reality in the human experience. They're an inevitable reality of life. But at the same time, it's staggering how it's forgotten. And it's almost like a weird paradox that the people behind the bank, who are people, behind the bank desks, behind the credit union desks, forget that as they rush through the paperwork. Like there's
yep,
such a focus on the number crunching. And like you said, like you had spent 4 or 5 weeks with this credit union. They knew you at this point, they knew what you were going through, yet you walked out that door feeling probably lonelier than when you
that's right.
started. Like your whole world is just um, falling around you. It's just collapsing. I actually last year lost a very close relative to pancreatic cancer as well. So
Mm,
it's such, it's, I think, one of the most unforgiving diseases. Like
mm,
it doesn't discriminate. It just doesn't discriminate
mm,
at all.
mm,
So to
mm,
deal with all that pain and then on top of that have such a cold and isolating experience. Like
mm.
in my case, I haven't been dealing with the inheritance process, but it scares me as someone who is young
Yep,
to prospectively be facing that. Like it just gives me more dread. Um, and again, that whole statistic that 45% of inheritors under the age of 40 are just walking out the door.
yeah,
It's like prime meat for the plucking, but just missing out
that's right.
because they're forgetting that humane process in the focus, the obsession with numbers at the end of the day, and
That's right.
checking um off processes and checking off boxes.
That's right.
Um, I know that Ribbon is still very new, but you've already made some incredible headway and forged some great partnerships with credit unions across the US, like First City Credit Union. And
That's
you've
right.
also partnered with companies like Peacefully,
That's right.
who I understand are an expert, they're provider of expert guidance in preparing for and navigating the loss of a loved one, and PortX in terms of integrating automated workflows. So you guys are really getting in and
Right.
getting all hands on deck to really bring this vision and mission to reality across the industry. In what ways has that close collaborative approach helped shape what Ribbon is doing for financial institutions?
Yeah, it's been, I mean, it's crazy how much has happened in just at this point, 18 months. We started our company a little more than 2 years ago. As you can imagine, the first 6 months was lots of just like different approaches to go to market. We initially thought
Mm,
about being consumer facing and then eventually realized that the best place to focus on was credit unions. So really, we've only been B2B and financial institution facing for the past like year and some change. And what we quickly realized is you cannot solve all of this at once, and you can't try to boil the ocean. It doesn't make sense. You'll fail. It's really it's bad business, but also a terrible experience for the people we're trying to help. If you do 100 things at an average quality rather than a few things at very high quality. So one of the principles that we have is we want to help lift the burden that people who are grieving are facing, right? How can we be more empathetic, and how can we help try to relieve some of the burden for people who are grieving? And That helped shape then our approach, which was we're going to go to market, we're going to partner with financial institutions, and we're going to partner with anyone else in the market that is working on this problem too, because we feel like we have a unique wedge, we feel like we have a unique problem, we feel like our wedge and the problem and solution that we're focusing on is not just unique, but perfectly placed to have different partnerships. So, for example, if anyone's working on what we call estate administration or estate planning or any of those, we're always willing to have not just discussions, but think about how partnership can work because the inheritance platform is working with someone who is going through the inheritance process, but there's also a lot of people who are thinking about, what might happen to themselves, right? I think about that too. I think about how I can plan for myself if I were to pass away. How can I make it easier for my family to go through that? And then that started shaping up a few other things. The most important and critical one by far was the partnerships with financial institutions. You mentioned First City Credit Union, for example. They were our first partner in the market. They are the ones who took a chance on us. Like, right, we'll always be forever grateful for the way that they put members first and took a risk in terms of partnering with a startup that had zero customers. And they have taught us so much, right? Like we went in thinking we could teach them a lot about how to be better and more empathetic and with terms of software. They have given us feedback that has like fundamentally changed how we think and how we operate, right? A lot of it's in the nuts and bolts of everyday activities, right? Like what happens, if you get, what happens if you don't know that a member passes away? What happens if you get an alert from the Social Security Administration if someone passes away? How do different things like loans work as compares to deposit accounts, things that the credit union space calls shares. That has just been absolutely critical for building out a product from, what started off as an MVP of really basic competence of like, okay, how can we just create digital dialogue and basically doc uploads to how do we have pre-verification systems? How do we check documents? How do we make sure deposit operations can be streamlined? And then we took it even further because, again, coming from the financial institution feedback, one thing they really wanted to do was automate deceased account workflows. It turns out, and again, this comes because of the feedback that we're getting from our partners, right? First City gave us this feedback. First US, another one of our partners in the Sacramento area, gave us this feedback. First Financial in Maryland, they gave us this feedback as well. They wanted to automate deceased account workflows because there's a lot of things that happen within their core systems where accounts are held that have to do with deceased accounts, right? You want to be able to, if you figure out that one of your members passed away, you want to put a freeze on their accounts. So money can't be withdrawn. You can't still keep using a credit card, for example. It's one of those basic things that financial institutions across the country and across the world do. And they were like, hey, how can you help us with this? And then that's where our partnership with Cordex came out. We were like, well, we need to be able to work with Jack Henry. We need to be able to work with Fiserv. We need to be able to work with Correlation Keystone, right? Like we need to be able to work with these core systems to do read and write into core systems. And then that way, our product can sit on top of core systems and document storage systems, automate those deceased account workflows. So it's not just the inheritor that's having this empathetic and thoughtful experience, but it's also that operations and deposit operations team that's having that thoughtful, empathetic experience. Because if they're not happy and if they're not able to do their jobs well, it has a ripple effect and it makes it makes the experience worse off for everyone.
Yeah, that was actually something that was on my mind as well, because obviously for us being on the other side of the desk, it's really easy to say like, oh, you guys should just be more mindful of people's emotions. But obviously when they're under pressure to meet certain quotas, to meet certain check boxes, etc., that can be easily forgotten or easily overlooked, unfortunately. So it's really, really impressive that you're taking the time to embed this comprehensive technology that makes everyone's lives easier and empowers the teams, empowers the operations happening behind the scenes to then really, really drive that change, not just on like a shallow level, but on a much deeper level throughout the whole process. Have you found that the teams are very adoptive, very, very ready to embrace this shift, or has there been some trepidation, some hesitation at all?
Yeah, it's both because the reality is that like the teams that we work with are going to have an enormous amount of expertise.
Hmm.
So in some sense, I find that our partners are very eager to work with us because they see how broken this process is. But on the other hand, they also have a lot of workflows that they've already built out. They also know all the different edge cases, right? They have lots of reasonable questions and reasonable hesitations that come around like, okay, what do we do if something's a loan? What do I do in the case of something's a trust? I actually have already built out an internal alert system so we know if someone passes away, other teams get alerted. How do you work with that? So, we've quickly realized, and I think a lot of founders and startups realize this, like, you have to get into the details and you have to get in the weeds and you can't avoid the details at a certain point. We can't just, with the first few months we were going and talking to credit unions, it was always high level. It was like, okay, we want to make this experience better or we want to automate everything. But then there's a question of, okay, how? And what about this case? What about that edge case? And so we've actually leaned into any hesitation to ask why and try to get feedback and questions. And that has made our product like 10x better. And so what we see across the board is whether someone's a partner with us right now, whether someone, well, hopefully we will be with the partners with us soon, pretty much anyone who will talk to us, it's very much like, oh, you're working on something that's really important. I see this problem and I actually waste like tons of time on it. And I can see how frustrated members or non-members are when they're going through this experience. Had multiple different financial institutions tell me that they've had someone cry or yell at them because the experience is so bad. So we definitely get this feedback of like, you're working on something important. Then it's just a question of like, okay, can we implement this in a way that actually still works with not just obviously compliance and regulation, but can we make this work within our workflows? And I'd like to think over the past year we've gotten much better at that.
Yeah, that's really impressive considering what you've 18 months to 2 years and you're already forging so many, comprehensive avenues to really embedding this technology. And one thing like in finance, for instance, it's obviously the legacy tech, the existing digital ecosystems that, a lot of platforms are working within are really complicated. And
Yeah,
that's like the thing that really gets the hackles up because banks and financial institutions are, in the age of digitalization, it's all about efficiency, it's all about speed. So I
yeah,
suppose like I can imagine that any threats to those bottom lines can really, really get them, okay, whoa, like what are we talking here? So
exactly.
it's really really interesting and really impressive that you're taking this so closely into consideration from the ground up. Um, and obviously, to me, it sounds like it's also a work in progress. Like it's something that you're continuing to develop, continuing to work on as you branch out in terms of partnerships and collaboration across the industry.
Right.
Um, so yeah, that is really interesting. Um, I also feel like, the digital slash tech talk has been inundated with this word personalization. It's like a big thing for what the past decade or so in banking. Um, but at the same time, I sometimes wonder if it's just becoming another box to take off in order to attract more customers, become bigger and better. Um, in the process, I actually think banks and financial institutions are possibly forgetting personability, which I think is at
Yes.
the core of this problem. Um, Customers and consumers today are a lot more discerning when it comes to digital experiences. They don't
Yep.
take things at face value, especially younger generations. How are you maintaining authenticity in your compassion and empathy-driven mission at Ribbon? Are authenticity and empathy qualities that you can actually scale?
Yeah, we strongly believe yes, and we strongly believe the key words that you put there are authenticity and empathetic. And then the question is like, what does that actually mean? In our case, for people who are grieving, they're not looking for their financial institution to be like a family member. Like we talked to a lot of folks who have gone through, a lot of grief. We've talked to a lot of people who've lost loved ones. We've talked to widows. We've talked to people who lost parents. I've talked to people who've lost siblings. And across the board, you get the same message, which is like, I have or hopefully I will have a community that I'm looking to have as a shoulder to cry on. My bank or credit union is that's not what I'm looking for from them, right? Like I know what those intimate relationships are in my life in which I'll have those avenues to grieve. And if I don't have those avenues, I don't expect the financial institution to be that avenue. I know I have to go find that through other means, whether it's grief counseling or through a community or what have you. But there is still a way to be empathetic and authentic when you're dealing with a financial institution and when a financial institution is dealing with someone who's grieving. And when we talk and we do these focus group discussions, it's a consistent answer, which is like, are you being responsive? Are you using thoughtful language? Are you making sure that I have options in terms of dealing with you when I want to ask a question or if I want to submit a document, et cetera, right? It is not empathetic to say, oh yeah, drive in 6 miles on a Tuesday between 10 a.m. and 4 p.m. To a working mom who is working on like her inheritance for her dad, right? Like that's not an empathetic experience. She's working, she has kids, and now you're saying I have to come in during branch hours to send a death certificate, even though it's pretty obvious I could submit that online, right? And if your question is on authenticity and verification, well, we live in the age of AI. Why can't you authenticate and verify that online? So we started taking this feedback that came from financial institutions who say, I want to be authentic and I want to be empathetic. What do I do? And then focus group discussions who are like, we just want someone to be able to listen to us on our terms. My relationship with my financial institution is something that is unique, but it's obviously going to be different than some of the other relationships I have. And we put that and we triangulated that into the Ribbon platform. And the idea is, pretty straightforward in the sense of make sure you're listening to people when they come, make sure you are train your staff so they know what to say, right? A lot of the time someone in a branch call center, it's their first job or one of their first jobs. So just like make sure you understand basic language and ways to use. A classic one is don't say, sorry for the death. Don't use the word die or dead or death, right? Just say pass away. The language is a little bit softer. Make sure you're comfortable and understand how to use that kind of language. And then finally, just give them options in terms of how they want to deal with you. If you talk to someone who just lost a parent and who's a working mom, she's pretty honest about what she wants. She's like, I just want to be able to do this after I put my kids to bed. And if I'm working, like I can't do it during working hours. So can I just like submit this online? And that is actually just a very empathetic experience. And then the authenticity just comes with being able to, follow, your ethos as a financial institution about wanting to help members in your community, and making sure that when you say something like I'm sorry for your loss, which is, a lot of financial institutions will say that. Make sure it's not coming from an automatic AI chatbot or an automatic AI voice, right? I've heard a story before where someone was on hold with a bank and then they heard an I'm sorry for your loss coming from what was obviously a recorded line, right? And you're like, that is not authentic. That is actually more offensive than anything else. No one wants to hear I'm sorry as a recorded line. We all know that you don't actually believe that. And even if it was a human voice, no one wants to hear I'm sorry after being on hold for an hour and a half. Like at that point, it's just like if you were actually sorry, you would let me be able to do this online. So we then take that all together and then want to be able to put this in a platform that, to your point, can scale so that it can go to, thousands of financial institutions, to millions of grieving families, to be able to say like, you're going to be able to do things on the terms that make sense for you given the situation you're in. And then finally, the last thing I'll say is we also then build out not just future features, but current features of our product that are baked into being empathetic. So we started asking, different financial institutions, what do you do right now if someone tells you I just lost my dad, right? Generally, it's like a shrug of the shoulders. But then we started actually hearing some interesting stories of folks who are doing it really well. And they were like, well, we have one of our staff members. She's been amazing. And she always makes sure she sends flowers, right? And we were like, well, what happens if she leaves? Like, she's the person who sends flowers for a financial institution. What happens if she goes? They all kind of just shrug their shoulders. And we were like, I bet we could help take that concept and build it into a product that we could scale to the whole US and to the world. And so we call that feature as part of our inheritance platform, condolences, where you can automatically send a physical card, you can automatically send flowers, and you can send it to the door of someone who's grieving as soon as you verify that that is actually someone who is related or part of the family member who passed away. So little things like that, like our platform is not just about making sure that checking account can be closed and transferred over to the next of kin. It's also about being able to like do things like send a note or send some flowers over to someone who's grieving.
And in times of tragedy, in times of intense difficulty, it's those little gestures that make all the difference. And I think people
That's
really
right.
carry that with them moving forward. And I know you actually recently just had a story about the impact, the power of the impact of that seemingly simple gesture with a widow who'd actually come into a credit union, Mrs. McSweeney. Interestingly,
That's right.
she'd just come back from Ireland. I'm half Irish, so that also stood out to me. And yeah, this incredible story that she comes home after losing her husband,
That's right.
and she comes home to these flowers, and it just
That's right.
changed everything for her. Like it's incredible because she actually then stayed on with the credit union, didn't she?
That's right. That's right. So this was a story that like still, I mean, moves me to tears. The story, as you mentioned, is Mrs. McSweeney. She lives in the greater Los Angeles area. Her husband, William McSweeney, passes away. And he was this really well-respected LA County Sheriff's deputy. Huge tragedy. He passes away. She's in Ireland. She tells First City that that her husband William passes away. She's obviously going through a really hard time. She's trying to understand what's going on. She's obviously not just dealing with First City as well. She's dealing with a bunch of other things. And she then immediately is able to alert First City Online. She gets the link. She's able to submit everything. And our understanding is like this is an empathetic process for her, et cetera. But First City goes above and beyond. They use the condolences feature because they now know that her husband passed away, and they send her flowers. And she comes back home from Ireland, and she shares this story openly with the First City operations team. She literally opens the door, or comes home and opens the door. She sees flowers there, and she starts crying. She's like, I can't believe this. Like, this is so thoughtful. She sees it's from First City. She calls First City, and she's like, first thing I want to do is talk to a manager. And she talks to the manager there. She talks to the team there, and she's just like, I was not planning on being a member with you. I was planning on getting this check and going with my current institution. I'm coming into the branch tomorrow. Like, I'm coming in tomorrow, and I want to be a member, because if you treat me like this right now, then I know that you'll be there for me when things are also on the better side too. If you can be a light for me in dark times, then I know you can also be a great partner through the different phases of my life. And it was just a story that just gave us goosebumps. I mean, the thought of like a widow coming home to flowers, feeling like she was seen. And I remember talking to different folks about this. The story ended up going viral. It got picked up in a bunch of different publications. And the thing that really stood out was just like how much of a 180 of an experience that is
Yeah.
as compared to the experience that most people go through right now. Like, your average inheritance experience right now, if you go and just talk to someone who had to go through it, whether it's a widow or someone who lost a parent or a sibling, it's like, it's a nightmare. It's like 12, 18 months. It's constant in branch visits, constantly being put on hold, being told different things on the phone. And at the end of it, you just, you maybe get a check, and they just don't even say anything. And then Mrs. McSweeney's experiences, she's able to alert First City from abroad. She comes home, she has flowers, things are taken care of, and she can move on. And this, obviously, it's wonderful that she became a member. We highlight this because we believe empathy is good business. But also, when you hear the story, you go like, isn't that just the right thing to do? Like, isn't that just a wonderful way as a credit union, as a financial institution to behave?
Yeah, absolutely. Like it's good business, but it's also just good practice. Like, small acts of kindness are
That's right.
what we really ultimately remember and carry with us. Like obviously everyone at some point in their life has to deal with grief. And I know from my own experience and then speaking to others, it's those little gestures. You remember the
That's
people
right.
who showed up in small ways, big ways, whatever, but you remember the people who showed up and you
That's
remember the
right.
people who didn't. And
That's right.
obviously, for like credit unions, financial institutions dealing with inheritance, the fallout there is that they could lose people, walking out the door and never looking over the shoulder at them again, never giving them time of day again. Um, and I will say, like, as someone who, I identify as a zillennial, I'm kind of in between millennial and Gen Z.
Right.
I'm just very confused in that regard, but I know that we have certain outlooks. And I know
Right.
millennials and Gen Z have certain outlooks as well.
Right.
And I also know that millennials, I think, eat up most of the consumer base. of banking and financial institutions right now. I think the majority of account holders are millennials. So this is like, it's a big priority. I've seen the big four talking about, targeting, really connecting with these younger generations.
Yep.
Um, we grew up when the Great Recession hit, and
Yep.
also at a time when putting credit card details, to get a premium Club Penguin account was something that you didn't do. Like, no way was I going to ever put my dad's
Right.
credit card details. So we've grown up in a very interesting time in terms of the
That's right.
digital transformation of, banking services and financial services in general. But look at us now, like we're leaving our wallets at home, but never our phones. I remember when Apple Pay became a thing and everything. Um, we are a very values-driven generation, but we're also
Yep.
super cynical. I think millennials and Gen Z do
Yeah.
share this in
Yep.
common. We're digital natives. We're also super cynical. We
Yep.
also love ethics. We love to see values
Yep.
in banks that, like ESG and all of that, green
Yep.
bonds and everything have really taken off. Um, and then, of course, keeping in mind that we're set to be like the big recipients of the great wealth transfer. Um, and it's just such a crazy time, like in the finance world in general. Like finfluencers are a
Yes.
thing. People want education,
Yes.
empowerment, but they're not
Yeah.
going to like I don't go to my banks for financial advice. I go to social media and I look at like friends that invest and
Totally.
those kinds of platforms. But we do have that hunger for empowerment, for efficiency, but also for empathy. Um,
Totally.
like, how do you navigate that, as a values-driven founder? Like, what are some tidbits or takeaways that you have for really connecting with these younger generations as well, like younger account holders especially?
Yeah, you hit on some of the key ones, which is it's really hard to try to be perfect for everyone, but there are some consistent principles that I think lead to thoughtful and empathetic, um, especially, or maybe I should say, even if it's cross generation. So digital first is one that you mentioned, right? And I think what I realized is even though millennials and Gen Z are digital first and digital expected and digital preferred, across the board, we see that people want to have options. So they want to be able to have self-serve as an option. They also want to be able to have an option to pick up and call if things aren't working. I think that probably touches obviously older generations who grew up without digital first. That makes sense. They may feel more comfortable with it. They have more trust for it. But it tends to also be true for Gen Z and millennials too. And like, question is why? And to me, like, you kind of touched on some of the cynicism. I think that's there. I think we've also just interacted with a lot of digital products that haven't worked. Like everyone
Yeah.
knows the experience of like trying to create an account and then like you try to get an OTP and then the text doesn't deliver and then like if anyone's ever driven an EV car, like if you ever had a situation where like you go to like one of the EV chargers and it's not working and it's not
Yeah.
unlocking and you have to call the EV number line. Like, we've all had those experiences where you're like, technology is actually making it feel like it's making things worse. So when baking this in, we were like, how can we create a product that provides what seems to be obvious, which is a lot of stuff just doesn't require you to branch, but also make sure that people feel comfortable and don't feel like they're being forced to be online because we all had that feeling of being like, just forget it. I'm right here. Why can't I do it? Or like if someone is like, so like I had a situation where I talked to someone who like literally works right near a branch of one of the credit unions. It's our customers. And they're like, whatever, it's just like right next door. I'll just go right now. Why would we force them to go online? The branch is right there, right? So then what we did was we intentionally built in a hybrid solution. And what that means is everyone can use our system to alert, anyone can use our system to upload documentation, anyone can use our system to go through and interact with what we call our inheritor dashboard, but they can also go in the branch because the branch has their own view. And the branch can also start and they can finish at home, or they can start at home and then finish in the branch. So we kind of think about this way of like, how can you provide a hybrid solution
Hmm.
um, to answer and like really address the different generations and how they expect to interact with technology. And then we've also had some fun surprises too. There was this focus group discussion that was led by the design team at Community Financial Credit Union. And she was telling us like she got this focus group discussion together for a bunch of their members who was like and asking them how they wanted to do things like for different phases of life. And one of the phases of life that came up was like what happens when someone passes away and you're going through the inheritance. And I can't remember exactly the age. I think she was 70 or 75. She was, this lady who was a little bit older and not digital native. And she says this hilarious comment of like, I don't want to use a website for anything. I want to go in a branch. And then they show them what she didn't know this, but they show them a mock-up of our product. And they're like, well, what about this? And she looks at it and she goes, all right, I use a website for that. And I thought that was like such a funny example of like, you have to be able to provide different options for different people because if you just bucket everyone above the age of 70 as just wanting to go and branch, you can miss out on those stories. Same thing happens with Gen Z and millennials. Like if you just think they're always going to want to be online, you're going to miss out on the people who want to like go and branch and do a call. Instead, just give people options and people
Yeah.
really prefer options. They love options. And then that way you can check off a lot of boxes.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love that as well because I think like just as someone who fits within that younger generation as well and like you said digital first and everything is all fine and dandy but sometimes when things hit the fan you want to be able to like speak to an actual person as well and have that option to fall back on like that flexibility I think is really important so having the rigidity is it seems is not the way to go, of course. Um, and hopefully credit unions are, evolving to embed that hybrid approach and to also integrate that flexibility. Do you think this is something that they have been a bit further behind on in terms of, digital transformations? Um,
Yeah, again, it always comes case by case. In some ways, I've been very surprised. And in a lot of ways, I see it's not, it's not even that it's probably that there's a lot of different priorities and there's a lot of different things that they want to focus on. Um, but sometimes, case by case, we meet folks who have a tech stack or a digital strategy or digital innovation that is like far above what I would consider your top 15% in the market, top 10% in the market. I mean, sometimes you meet folks who are really on top of it. As a general rule, probably yes, they're behind in terms of digital innovation. They know this. They talk about this in every conference that you go to. This is something that like is like very much top of mind. And I think the thing that we've started to realize is it's not because a lack of want, and it's not because of a lack of awareness. It is simply because if you do not have the resources of the mega banks, if you don't have the resources of a large, massive financial institution, um, you're going to have to prioritize. And there are really hard priority decisions to make every year. Like, sometimes we're talking to folks and they're like, I love your solution. I think this makes so much sense. And I think the case numbers make it a no brainer. And then we're like, well, why didn't you sign with us right now? And they'll be like, I literally don't even have a way to do digital mortgage applications or digital account opening solutions. Like someone still has to do it by paper and fax it in.
oh my God.
And then, yeah, and then we go, all right, that kind of makes sense, right? Like you have something
Yeah.
huge to do. Um, so, we've kind of like met folks across the board where we're starting to like kind of get a sense of like where the financial institutions in the US are at with digital innovation. And we can see that like some folks really surprise us, but there is simply a lot of work to do when it comes across the whole tech stack. So we kind of have to meet folks where they are.
Yeah, well, I'm excited to see what comes, especially with Ribbon now in the mix and on the scene. And, what you guys are doing to make it a reality in terms of scaling those innately human qualities like empathy, authenticity, compassion, just, small acts of kindness. Just to wrap up, it's astounding to see how much there's still to go for people to feel really seen and heard in one of the most difficult chapters of their life. But it's equally incredible to see how startups like Ribbon are changing that for the better. Financial matters aren't something that you'd automatically connect with emotional well-being, but it's a massive gap that's been left out of the conversation for far too long. So I'm so glad that Ribbon is addressing this head on, helping make the inheritance process easier, more empathetic, and compassionate. It gives me a huge degree of comfort as someone who who feels very daunted by anything financial, let alone anything financial in the midst of grief. Saeed, thank you so much for joining me today and helping me kick off this podcast. I think you have an incredibly inspiring story, and I'm just super excited to see it continue unfolding. On a final note, this is just the beginning of Ribbon's story. Saeed, where's the best place for listeners to keep a pulse on Ribbon's impact? And if they want, reach out to you.
Yeah, our website is a great place to start. Go to trustribbon.com, trustribon.com. You can follow me and connect with me on LinkedIn. You can follow and connect with Ribbon on LinkedIn as well. And yeah, hopefully, if anyone has any questions, we do our best to respond to anyone who reaches out. And yeah, we're looking forward to hearing from folks. I really enjoyed this conversation. I really appreciate the kind words as well. We're hopefully going to be helping a lot of people, and we feel honored to play a small part in what we think is a really, really big mission.
Yeah, I can genuinely see that you are genuinely driven by what you do, and the value is there. And I'm someone who's very cynical, by the way. Like I've never bought from
Gen Z.
Temu. Yeah, I've never bought from Temu. All my friends buy from Temu. I'm not someone who buys into things so easily, but this is something I buy into. And yeah, you're directly changing lives. You're directly reshaping how such a horrific experience can be made even that little bit easier, which I think makes all the difference in the world. So huge respect to you, and huge respect to Alan as well, and what everyone at Ribbon is doing. So thank you for your contribution in that.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for tuning in to Founders on the Beat, where we delve deeper into keeping humans at the heart of technology. Keep an eye out for our next episode, and don't forget to follow us for fresh updates.